What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Everything Paranormal Show. Joining me tonight is going to be co-hosting Stacey Tallitsch. Stacey, welcome to the show tonight. Thanks for being host.
Thank you. It sounds like your mic's actually kind of muffled. You
It
gotta.
could be. Who
Oh,
knows?
there we go. It's good.
All right. I might have been just backed off of it. All right. So, folks, you got to forgive me if it sounds like I'm coughing a little bit tonight. I've been having some sinus drainage, so it's been triggering some coughing. So I've got my water here. Got Stacey here to help. So tonight, folks, I didn't want to miss out on all these shows. Right, going up to Halloween is always my favorite time of year, and this is something I definitely love talking about, which is the subject of Halloween. So Stacey and I thought it would be really cool to just cover some different symbols and some different like iconic imagery that you always associate with Halloween, and we can probably talk about the evolution of Halloween and how it came to be, and where some of these symbols made their way into this conglomeration of holiday that we celebrate. So, Stacey, what about you? What do you like about Halloween, or do you not like Halloween?
I love Halloween. Here in New Orleans, it's bigger than Christmas. People just because the veil is so thin in New Orleans to begin with, and then when you add the Halloween, spirit into, the French Quarter and New Orleans, that's the best time to actually do investigations. I mean, because practically everything is haunted in New Orleans. You can go into a hotel just and not even go out into the city, just spend your time in the hotel doing investigations with EVPs and all kinds of other stuff. And I've done that. And, you get some really good stuff because something tragic or scandalous has happened everywhere in New Orleans at some point. And you got 400 years of history to, basically come alive once a year.
Right. Well, and I can't really think of any other place that, when you really think about a variety of like cities in America, New Orleans really is sort of known for the voodoo, hoodoo, all the different, you know. So in a way, it's like you don't really have any other cities known for that, so to speak. So it definitely has its own magic to it. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, every city's got some of it going on. Chicago, New York, Miami, even LA. There's a lot of the Latin influence with the Day of the Dead going on anyway, and they have Santeria, they have like you said, voodoo, hoodoo, and all of these things, and Halloween isn't really a holiday on that level because they're not agrarian based. They're literally date back to the hunter gatherer days, so their calendar is a little bit different. But at the same time, that's when everything really does come alive, and a lot of rituals are done. Not necessarily because of Halloween, but it just a culmination of the end of the year. I mean, it's harvest season, regardless of whether or not it was agrarian. So
Right. So I wanted to say hi to Matt, paranormal consultant, and I see you see me. She's in there, and of course Terry Lynn just popped in. So it's good to see you guys. So anybody else out there, welcome to the show. But you're not gonna want to miss this. We're gonna talk about some really awesome stuff. So I want to begin with just a quick little history lesson of some of the very first traces of, I guess there's many different things that kind of come together to form Halloween. But, so for that, we got to kind of pick apart different aspects. And let's go back. So thousands of years ago, the to the Celts. All right, that's where we're going to go back to, all the way to the Celts. The Celtic calendar was divided into a light half and a dark half. The Celts celebrated their Samhain festival, their harvest festival, around like October 31st. And of course, with bonfires, and they were welcoming the new year. This is that transition of going from that light half to that dark half. So they had bonfires, they partied it up. And we're actually going to get into one of the iconic symbols here, one of the first incidences here. But the harvest was really important back then. It was a matter of life and death. I don't think people realize you just didn't have stores. So they experienced a lot of death. You know, if they didn't have a good harvest that year, I mean, it all revolved around their harvest. I mean, think about it. You could have a food shortage. You can't run to a store anywhere. You know, so for them, it was celebration, and also the Celts believed that this is where time and space, and this is going to allude a little bit what Stacey was talking about. But they believed that this is where time and space would blend the realms a little at this time, and it allows passages among the living and the dead worlds. The Celts believed the veil was at its thinnest, and the living and the dead could commingle. Of course, there's also sometimes they said you can get lost to the other side if you accidentally cross the veil and you can't find your way back. It was such a blur. It was so thin. And I before I turn it over to you, Stacey, so you can add your thoughts to all this. Um, Bats, one of the iconic symbols, just like behind me, right over there. Bats, an iconic symbol of Halloween. This is one of the first references that was possible because of the bonfires. Sometimes these bats would be buzzing by, killing insects and stuff at night while they're doing their bonfires. So that's where some of that first iconic imagery of bats tend to pop up in the history. So I just thought I'd add that in there of why we see some of that. Stacey, what are your thoughts on some of that origin of the Celts?
Well, the origin of the Celts, I mean, that's pretty much where we get what we understand is the modern Halloween experience, even with, going door to door and, getting candy or getting food because food was scarce. The whole idea was you either give food or we're going to trash your house, the trick or treat. And it was um, in Roman times, they actually called it the Avegi, where it was a day for children, where the adults would become servants to children, and they would treat children as though they were rulers of the house. The Day of Children is, essentially what Halloween has become today. But to go back even further from the Celts is to go all the way back to what is known as the Sabian Empire. And a lot of people don't know what the Sabians are, but it's the Yiddish pronunciation of Saba is Sheba. So you have the Queen of Sheba. She was the one that actually was the ruling queen of the whole Middle East long before when Solomon was around. Solomon wasn't the king of everything in the Middle East. It was the Queen of Sheba, which he seduced and ended up, combining those empires.
Right.
Anyway, in that time, they actually they didn't have calendars like what we have calendars today. It wasn't even, something you could put on paper. It was astrology. What was in the stars was the date. And that's how you knew what date was what based off of the astrology. And the constellations themselves had 13 instead of 12. However, the Placidian constellation coming over the horizon, which happens on October 31st, it did back then because of the Earth wobbles. It doesn't do that anymore, but back then it did. That marks, in their culture, a time when there was a great cataclysm and almost everybody died. They talk about a great flood and different things like that. They marked the Day of the Dead as October 31st in Sabian culture to mark the time that actually to be fearful that of another cataclysm, because the Placidian constellation was a harbinger of doom, essentially. So they gave respect, they gave offerings, and what the priests would do is they would all year long they would create these bricks of hashish, and they would have a bonfire. They would be, naked under their robes, dancing around this bonfire. And as the smoke from the hashish was coming up, they would throw the back of their cloaks over their heads so that they, inhale the smoke as it was coming off the bonfire. And they'd have these, feasts and orgies and agapes, what they became called, where it was just essentially a combination of Halloween, what we understand it, and Mardi Gras, where, all debauchery was, to get it out of your system. And,
Yeah, this sounds like Tommy Chong's annual Halloween party.
Yeah. Well, I mean, since they were the ruling empire, every other culture that surrounded them decided to take it up too. And it fostered from empire to empire throughout history. And, even when the Romans were trying to extinguish all forms of paganism, they ended up preserving it when they decided to take on All Hallows Eve instead of,
Right.
in their calendar.
So, all right. So hold that thought, because now you just segued into something for me here. So I want to get into this part too, because that way, since you brought it up, I'm gonna do this next bit of information here. So rather than trying to stomp out pagan holidays, this is what we just talked about, right?
Mhm.
So the Christian church decided to take them over and make them and sort of remake them, right?
Mhm.
So May 13th was Lamoria. Okay, this was a Roman pagan. It's the day that they celebrated the dead on Lamoria. They basically the larvae, the ghosts of the departed, came up and haunted the dead. So they were offered milk and little cakes to sort of quell the dead. That was like their Roman pagan ritual,
Mhm.
was just to try to quell the dead by offering them the milk or these little cakes and stuff. And of course, the church, they decided to co-opt Lamoria in 609 AD, and they changed it to All Saints Day.
Mhm.
Okay, it's a day to celebrate the holiest of dead. Christians, of course, they Christianized the pagan festival and kept a lot of the same things kind of going. They did a lot of the same, or offer up cakes and stuff, things like that. So you can see where we're already starting to get some of these traditions that we see nowadays a little bit. But it was so successful that they actually moved it to November 1st, and it became All Hallows Day.
Mhm.
And because Samhain fell on October 31st, people started calling it All Hallows Evening, and then, of course, shortened to Hallows Even, and then Halloween. The church eventually took up another notch, and they added another day where everyday Christians of November 2nd was All Souls Day to honor the departed. So this is also where you get a lot of Halloween that's kind of associating death and the supernatural. Thanks, church. Way to go.
Yeah, they preserved a lot of the things they were actually trying to extinguish, which is great because life would be really boring if of course they didn't anticipate the internet coming along and entertaining anyone that way. But the ancient Egyptians had the same thing in the spring, on the spring equinox, and they gave cakes and beer. Beer was actually not meant for human consumption; it was meant for the dead alone, and they fermented it basically by chewing up wheat and rye and spitting it into a bowl, and it just fermented in the bowl. And I wouldn't want to drink that either. But that is the initial invention of beer was specifically for the dead, and said,
That's
well,
cool.
why should they just be the ones to party?
Right? Seems like there's always an excuse to party in here, right? So
friars are the ones that are making all the beer, the best beer these days. You know, the friars, whatever it's called. It's like mead and it's like drinking a loaf of bread. It's so heavy, but they make the best stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't drank beer in a long time, but I've never had a chance to really drink any old school like meads or anything like that. Everything I always drank was just basic beers or whatever, some darks and stuff, but mostly lights. I didn't drink a lot of like real heavy stuff. I'm not a big Guinness drink or anything like that.
Me either. I mean, I make mead myself. It's really easy to do. All you need is yeast and honey, and you can make yourself some, nice champagne of beer. That's what it tastes like. Anyway.
Bob, who popped in here, said a lot of the dead is the result of beer. Right? Well, you could also say the result of beer leads to a lot of new living.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next thing, and let's get into a little bit of where we're starting to see trick-or-treating. So around the Middle Ages, All Souls Day, the church still wanted people, what they wanted to is the church wanted people to pray for souls that were stuck in purgatory. So if enough prayers were offered up, souls could go to heaven because they believed that, you could rescue people from purgatory. And the children would go souling. Okay. They would knock on doors and ask for spiced cakes in return to pray for souls. And yeah, that's all I had on that. So I was like trying to look at my notes here, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, even then you can see where, like we talked about, the church with them trying to find a way to, keep that tradition. That's how they Christianized it. Was like, well, instead of offering these cakes to quell the dead, we're just gonna say we're trying to save souls.
Yeah, televangelists do the same thing. If you send me $20 and put your hand on this piece of paper, you send that in, and I will pray for you. That kind of thing, it's been burned out. But hey, if it gets you some sweet cakes,
right? So okay. I want to get into another big icon because this is around that time as we get into the 16th century, right? Mm-hmm. And that is witches. Okay, so the iconic image of the witch, of course, it's notorious with Halloween. You don't really talk too much about witches other than when you get around Halloween. There's, of course, the iconic imagery, even though just like with vampires, they tried to make witches sexy now. But, of course, they used to always have the pointed nose and the pointed hat and all that stuff. So here's what I found over the years of my research of where a lot of things came as far as the traditional iconic imagery of witches. Now, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about maybe some real stuff too. So in the 16th century, of course, there was the witch panic. And of course, they were usually women. And a lot of times these women were really just, most of the time they were just healers. They had a lot of old school in potions and things that were handed down, ingredients with mortar and pestis and stuff. They were kind of like your homemade, your medics, like your, what do you call it? The holistic medicine. They were doing a lot of the natural type stuff. But they were usually healers, doing cures. And of course, then, there was the religious craze where people were becoming suspicious that they was like using devil magic and stuff. But also one of the reasons why, too, is some of the symbols of the witches, because a lot of these women that were accused back then were usually living alone. They probably would have had a broom, maybe even a cat, hanging around the hearth or something, usually probably a little eccentric, especially if they were healers and things like that. And of course, the cauldron. But back then, almost every house had cauldrons. So it's not uncommon. But again, these are all things that they would have used their cauldrons probably a lot more than others because of brewing stuff, making these soups and potions and things. And of course, the hats. Actually, the pointy hat back then, a lot of country women had a very similar kind of pointy style hat. So that's why I wanted to throw that out there. A little bit of the real side of where some of the witches, some of the mythos came from on that. So, Stacey, what do you want to add to the witch conversation?
Well, it's true that most of the time, the people that were persecuted, hung, burned, the burning times of what a lot of pagans refer to has been completely exaggerated. They want to equate the 300 years of, the Spanish Inquisition from going from country to country. You have Spain, you have England, you have basically this purge from the Catholic Church of all things pagan. But they went after women, specifically older women, because women were property. And when women were widowed, because men usually died before them, they were completely vulnerable to suspicion at that point. Why this woman outlived her husband, she was essentially becoming more independent. She had property. She might have had money. All of these things that she basically inherited from her husband were now a threat to society because it showed that women could live without a man. They had lifelong skills of becoming healers because they were mothers, they were grandmothers, and they were taught by their grandmothers how to deal with pain, like crushing herbs together to create the precursor to aspirin, and various other things, to use honey to infection when you get a cut. I mean, these things were medicinal uses that were homeopathic, but they learned it from generation to generation to generation. That became scary to men in power because that challenged the whole idea that men should be the only ones in power. And using terroristic threats from the state by burning women alive, kind of put things in perspective of putting women in their place. Now, the thing that they came up with later in the book what is it? The Witch's Hammer, the Witch's Hammer book that they compiled to conduct these witch hunts. They noticed that whenever they burned old women, their bones looked like charred wood. They didn't look like bones. So they assumed that because these were witches, they didn't have bones like we did. They had wooden bones, and they would float. If they were a witch, you throw them in water, they float. If they sunk and drowned, well, they were innocent because they had regular bones.
Right.
But it was all osteoporosis.
Right.
Old crones that their bones were literally being hollowed out by osteoporosis because they didn't know about nutrition and calcium, and and you have more than 3 kids, and you can count the number of kids you've got by the number of teeth missing.
Right.
It's really basic nutrition. But back then they equated what looks like wood to wood, and it was crazy. But eventually science won out on the whole thing, and they decided to stop doing the witch burnings.
That's a good thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
of course, Bob says, where was Witch Lives Matter when they needed it? Bob, you're such a nutcase. I love it. So a little quick thing. We're going to talk a little bit about masks real quick. And then I really want to get into, we're going to start getting into sort of the mean side of Halloween here in a second. So masks kind of started showing up around the 17th century, and a lot of times it was a lot of these rowdy beggars. Actually, was they drank a lot of alcohol, and they started going around and demanding like food and drink and stuff. So as it became more demanding, they actually started wearing masks to hide their identity. So it was really almost like holding people holding people up, I guess. But and then in Britain they would wear masks, and they'd actually go around and perform little plays for food and money and stuff as well. So these are all little factors that started to play into these traditions. But one of the things that we have to start getting into is the traditions of the pranks and bonfires and these things as well. Now, I know we talked about the Celts with the bonfires, but so in 1605, there was a sort of a famous terrorist called Guy Fawkes overseas, and he was a terrorist. He was pro-Catholic, or a pro-Catholic terrorist, and he tried to blow up the House of Lords with a shit ton of basically black powder kegs. And of course, he was captured. He was found guilty, and he was drawn and quartered and hung, drawn and quartered, and his, of course, pieces were thrown into a fire. But I guess for some reason, just like that celebrity status in a way, kids started sort of mocking the memory of Guy Fawkes by having bonfires and then causing chaos in the streets. So Guy Fawkes Day actually fell on November 5th. So you can see where we're starting to get this string, almost like a week of just nothing but about celebration of the dead. Between Samhain, yes, between the Celt Festival and All Saints Day, All Souls Day, Guy Fawkes Day, we're really getting that sort of stretch. Okay, so you can kind of see where this is starting to go. But unfortunately, so in America, we had the Puritans, right? So the Puritans over here in America, and they, of course, they wanted to stomp out Halloween, but unfortunately, some of the settlers still brought over some of the traditions from overseas, and so they would, of course, start doing some of the Halloween traditions, doing the bonfires and things like that. So this is where, again, you start getting into a little bit of where we're getting the fires again, starting to get a little rowdy. Nothing totally crazy yet. But we are going to get into that here in a second. I want to give you a chance to add anything as well on Guy Fawkes or any of that. Is there anything you got on that?
Remember the 5th of November. Gunpowder, treason, and plot. No, the whole idea of wearing masks, that's a revival that keeps coming back over and over again. The Celtics did it too, where they would wear different animal faces just to, appease the different spirits that were there. They wanted to become one with nature, and I honestly believed that in that veil, they could metamorphosize themselves into those animals for that night. And they would, again, do these probably magic mushrooms, given the region. But, they would have these orgies and, basically act like animals out into the woods wearing these masks. You wouldn't know who they were, you wouldn't know who in the community you were having sex with, kind of stuff. It was essentially the common, I don't know what you call it, the swinger party of the day,
Right.
Which you'll notice. Well, I don't know if you would notice, but a lot of these swinger parties with the masks that high society gets involved with, it's always on Halloween that they do this. They have these big parties, these balls with the masks, and everybody throws their keys into a basket and goes off and does things with perfectly strangers. Uh, the mask theme comes up again and again and again for Halloween because you're masking who you are and essentially becoming one with the dead, because the dead are the unknown, the omni. Uh, it's very symbolic on a very psychological level. Uh,
Right.
Society doesn't know with children.
Yeah.
Masks. I'm saying.
Well, yeah. Now we're forced to wear them for this whole couth pandemic,
Yeah.
and so now people feel like they can hide behind them and act deviant. It empowers people sometimes, to be behind a mask like that, and they feel like they can they hides their identity in a sense, even if we know who you are. Sometimes, like, well, just because you're wearing that mask, we know who you are, but it empowers them sometimes, So
Yeah. Well, it does both. It actually makes some people very submissive. It's why they do it in the Middle East with the burqas. Uh, it makes, if it's mandated upon you, it makes you submissive. While other people, it lets them become the villain and they can get away with it. And a lot of people do. Crime has gone up because nobody can be identified with all the cameras they're putting out. You wear sunglasses, hat, and a mask, and they don't know who you are. It's
plus, when we lost a bunch of police officers, but anyways, that's another subject.
yeah.
All right, so I want to get into another icon as we get into. I've kind of been making my way up through history a little bit, so I want to get into another something that's iconic around Halloween, and that is ghost stories.
Mhm.
So now, of course, I know that stories are a tale as old as time, right? That's how we communicated things for years, but the ghost story really caught on. So this is around the time when the Americans, you got to remember that we're talking about the late 1800s when the Americas entered into that 4-year Civil War. And you have to remember that the Civil War ended with over 500,000 dead. There was so many unclaimed and unknown dead bodies that the country was obsessed with death back then. There was just a large amount of unknown death to where there was a sense among people that some people could show back up any day. So there became a lot of stories, a lot of ghost stories started to pop up around that time frame. Again, America was just caught up in the fascination of death or returning from the dead. Again, just so much unknown. We went through the bloodiest battle ever in history at that time. So ghost stories started to become popular. What do you think about that, Stacey? You think that's
Well, again, you're dealing with an era with very limited communication, very limited entertainment venues. I mean, you couldn't even listen to music whenever you wanted to. You had to actually go to a concert to listen to music or have to play it yourself. Uh, these things created a lot of free time and a lot of, I wouldn't say free time in the sense where they're just sitting around, but they had a lot of time to just sit and wonder. And that all by itself creates um, different scenarios, different stories, what ifs that, you know, get passed around. Gossip was the only way you really got any information. Uh, the news was always 6 months behind in the newspaper because the means of communication was just so slow, even with the telegraph. So if you wanted to find something out, rumor a lot of times became myth, and that's where you're getting a lot of your stories from. Uh, Not to mention that it also was before the light bulb, so the dark was really scary. Candlelight only got you so far, and just beyond the candlelight was pure blackness. As a full moon would be sort of a godsend in that regard, where you could see across the field. But outside of that, uh, your eyes do things like matrixing, where you start seeing movements in the dark because that's what your eyes expect to see. Uh, People moving, faces coming out of the woodwork, different things like that. And just from a psychological point of view, there was a shadow in every corner. So,
Yeah. I mean, to live in that time, the Civil War was one of the most documented wars ever, which I always found amazing because, you always start thinking back to like the 1800s or something. You think like that, not that it's archaic or anything, but, you don't realize how much technology they really did have, or at least how much they were able to document as well. But it actually is one of the most documented wars. But even just the fact that people in general, like you said, that's their entertainment. They didn't have YouTube and stuff. They didn't have the internet. So for them, stories, and of course, that a lot of these people were bound to know somebody that fought in the Civil War or never returned. I mean, obviously, with over 500,000 dead, a lot of people knew people that just never came home. So of course they're going to sit around. They're going to talk about things and talk about sometimes soldiers. And I'm sure some of these soldiers that did return, think about how horrific some of these soldiers, remember, they lost limbs and they were amputated very barbarically at times in these field hospitals with saws, hacksaws, and stuff. So some of these kids, it would have been scary to see some of these wounded veterans coming home in just a real bad mess sometimes. So it's very easy to see how ghost stories became a thing for sure. Bob said,
war story to ghost story. I
right.
mean, the number of people that died. Granted, half the people that died in the Civil War died of diarrhea, but it was the first industrial war in the world. I mean, before that, it was all, one-shot muskets, and now we've actually got machine guns and, iron boats that, shoot rockets and cannons and it was literally the first industrial war, and that all by itself made it really scary.
Yeah, Bob was saying that for some reason ghost stories don't scare him, which I got a comment on that. He also said a lot of ghost stories were made to keep children in line. And of course, Terry Lynn says she's really enjoying the show. She's just chilling, basically listening to us snuggled up in a comfy blanket. So first off, well, let me hit the kids in line. They're actually there's very much documented about some of the Indian cultures that actually, this is kind of just off subject, but they actually would use the Bigfoot mythology to keep the children in line in some Indian cultures. They would be like, hey, if you go to the woods, he's going to get you. And of course, they didn't call him Bigfoot. Obviously, there's a couple different versions that, depending on the Indian culture, which I don't want to get into that whole subject, but because I did a whole show on this with a Bigfoot guy. But anyways, I just thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so I mean, of course, ghost stories universally are going to help to keep kids in line sometimes.
Yeah,
but also,
the brothers Grimm, they took a lot of those same ghost stories for that same reason. I mean, the stuff that they originally had in Hansel and Gretel and the Baba Yaga and all of that, they were really kind of gross. They cleaned them up and made them happy and not as scary, but they were originally meant to scare the bejesus out of kids so they wouldn't, wander off into the woods.
Well, if I met John Wick, I'd be. Anyways,
Baba Yaga was supposed to be
now whenever I hear Baba Yaga, it's like that's all I think of is John Wick. I love those movies. I can't help it.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to get to too is Bob said the ghost stories don't scare him. I can believe that about Bob because I think Bob had that. He's always got that analytical mind. So it's like I could imagine like telling him a ghost story would be frustrating, because he probably would just try to debunk things, while you're like talking to him. It's like, it was a dark, scary night and my car broke down and I coasted over to the side. He'd be like, did you have your equipment with you? Did you do EVPs? I don't know. Anyways. But yeah. All right. So moving on. So we kind of got into the Civil War. Now, right after the Civil War, we had a mass immigration of Irish and Scottish settlers that came in, from the old world. They immigrated, and of course, when these Irish and Scottish settlers came in, they brought their rural old world traditions with them, and of course, the Scots, of course, introduced a scary bogeyman, or as we call him, the boogeyman, right? And how he would plague children by hiding under their beds, tapping on windows, or waiting at every gate Halloween night. And also, they started getting a little rowdy. Again, some of these old world traditions, some of this Guy Fawkes stuff. But again, this is where we start seeing the appearance of a boogeyman. So you start spreading that into the culture here in America also. So you can see everything's been layering up. If you guys haven't noticed tonight, ever since Stacey and I have been talking about the history, it's not just exactly one thing that creates what we know of Halloween today. So we got more layers, if you will, that's kind of ultimately going to lead us to where we are nowadays. But you can see where there's a lot of these influences are working their way in little by little and all kind of coming together at this moment in time. So I want to get into the jack-o'-lantern. All right, this is another huge mega symbol of Halloween. So I'm going to do my part, and I'm going to let you talk a little bit about it as well. But the jack-o'-lantern was a character from Europe that was he was so bad that he actually was thrown out of hell. So again, I'm not getting into the exact story, but the devil basically even gave Jack some burning embers from hell, which Jack then put in a hollowed-out turnip, and he would carry around. And the children in Europe would actually carve their own out of turnips. Well, of course, the Americans improved this by substituting pumpkins for the hard turnips, and of course, this would also lead into pranks. So I'm going to get into the pranks here in a little bit. Actually, I'll cover the pranks too. That way, you can kind of cover all that. So here's what really the kids figured out back in the day. So because remember, guys, these kids didn't have the internet. Okay, they didn't have a VCR at the time either. You couldn't just sit them down in front of Barney or something back in the day, right? So these kids quickly figured out that you could carve out a pumpkin, you could put a candle in it, you put a sheet over it. I know it's a little dangerous, but whatever, right? They didn't care back then. You put a sheet over it and you put it on a stick, and they would go to people's houses and they would pop them up in the windows and scare the hell out of people. All right. And so that's what the kids figure out. Now, the Scottish and the Irish immigrants, they brought a higher level of pranks. With them, they included things like stone throwing through windows. And, of course, American Boys was just getting started on a whole new trend of pranks. So this is where the pranks really started to come in, and of course the iconic image of the pumpkin. Now, I will admit, back in the day, think about it. You're chilling, you're like in your cabin, you don't have TV or probably even radio at the time. You got candle lights going on. All of a sudden, this freaking sheet covered face thing popping up in the. I mean, that would be scary back then. I mean, we have a lot of scary things that we were given images of now, but I mean, think about it back then. I mean, Stacey, what do you think? Would you have been scared?
Oh, well, it goes back to what I was saying before about matrixing things in the dark. All you have to do is put something up that is relatively similar to the shape of a person or an entity, a demon or whatever, just out of range of your candlelight. And you can see it off in the distance, the shadow of it, especially if it's got glowing eyes. And, you're hardwired since, the Stone Age to look at glowing eyes and run the other direction. It's because that's a predator that's about ready to eat you.
Right.
But, you see that where you shouldn't be see it on your own property or just outside in your lawn. You're going to freak out. And then you hear kids giggling, and of course, then you get pissed off and chase them down and all of that. But yeah, I mean, the story of Sleepy Hollow. I mean, that's that story of Jack being thrown out of hell. That is the story of Sleepy Hollow. Essentially, it's just been, rewritten.
Right.
The Headless Horseman.
Oh yeah, and I think that so. I want to get into the prank years, only because again, this is so synonymous, and this is ultimately what's going to turn us into the modern version. So, as we were getting into the 1920s, the early 1900s, again, the level of pranks was just reaching at a huge high. We had people were opening gates, letting livestock loose. They were taking people's cars, putting them up on haystacks and all kinds of stuff, like the old cars, the old model, Model Ts and stuff. They were really just taking these levels, just horrible levels. It really was bad. So frustrated, society getting frustrated with all of these traditions, started to try to come up with a variety of things to combat this.
Mhm.
So one is they actually they started doing parades through their main downtown, which you don't see a lot of Halloween parades nowadays, but they started doing some parades back then to start trying to make it a little fun. And
My
then,
hometown actually does that.
huh?
My hometown actually does that. I grew up in
Right.
Sycamore, Illinois, and they have Pumpkin Fest, and it is the biggest event of the fall is to put all these floats. My family had floats, every year when I was a kid, and we would win first prize in the local, contest. The courthouse would have pumpkin contests and dress up pumpkins, and it always had a theme to it. Whatever theme there was going on, you had to dress up pumpkins to fit the theme. But it's a big thing in my hometown. And,
Yeah, I know. I can remember when Halloween seemed to be a pretty big deal in general until Dr. Fauci killed everything. All right, uh, okay, so now we're talking about as we get into we're starting to get into the like 1930s, 40s, right?
Mhm.
Sears actually came out with a line of costumes, like box costumes, super popular back then. It was like where you actually started seeing that iconic, plastic mask, and you started really getting to, and homeowners basically started paying off tricksters with homemade treats. And back then, of course, popcorn balls, candy apples. So anybody that's our age or older, I mean, if you guys remember some of the earliest days, man. And as a kid, I hated getting popcorn balls. And
Candy corn. That's was the worst because those were just wax, sugar infused wax.
then, like, you'd always get somebody like you'd always have like an older lady that would wrap up a candy apple like in some wax paper or something and put it in your bag. You're like, oh man, But anyways, so the term trick or treat could be found as early as 1939 in print, showed up in print somewhere. So it's, I mean, I would assume obviously it's stemmed all the way back from the days, but as far as the actual term trick or treat, no one really specifically can coin it, but it did show up in print as early as 1939. And of course, candy companies, they jumped on board. And like I said, Halloween parties, all of these things started to become a way to combat and keep kids off the streets from committing these pranks. And so I do like to say that out of some of all this like dark paranormal and spookiness of Halloween, that there was some positivity that came out of it, because they found ways to make Halloween fun for kids and get them off the streets in that sense of committing crimes, you know. And was able to sort of bribe them, I guess, with some candy and everything, and have parties, and they made it fun. So this is where, and I'm kind of bringing this full circle, but the candy companies jumped on board, pop culture, Charlie Brown, 1960s, Donald Duck. They all started having cartoons with, it just became mainstream at that point. Then, of course, the 1970s when we had John Carpenter's Halloween. Everything just sort of made it mainstream and just became its own, what we know of today. Everything came together. So with that being said, what do you think about all that? You think does that sound about accurate? I mean, I've done this research a few years ago, and I've talked about it every year. So,
well, the thing of it is I think for the last 30 years, it's actually been they're trying to get rid of it. It's not society, the media and governments that brought it all up in the first place to occupy people's time rather than having the devil's night where everybody sets fire to stuff. They've been trying to get rid of it to essentially control society in the other direction. You have, like from the movies, a lot of the nanny state, mothers who are, you get the stuff in the media where it's like the razor blade and an apple, people being poisoned by the not the taffy apple, but the popcorn ball. And when they found these things, it was usually the family member doing it to their own family, and they blamed it on trick-or-treaters or, them trick-or-treating. Society has really tamed down what Halloween is all about through fear of actual predators. You can't send your kids out now to go trick-or-treating by themselves. Even with an adult chaperone, the trick-or-treating has come to a complete halt.
We never had an adult with us.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, it was, like Mardi Gras, where I lived in Illinois at the time, but for kids, we were combing the neighborhood up and down, trying to find new places that would, have more candy because I still had room in my bag. I needed to get more, and the night was still going on.
Oh yeah, I had a pillowcase, man. I didn't have any kind of plastic pumpkin or anything. No, I had a pillowcase, man. That's how we did it back then. And we ran, like we had to run. And of course, I lived out in the country, so we had our houses were like Tara Lynn knows. She got to go where I grew up trick or treating, and but with that being said, the people out in the country, they would hook you up with full on like candy bars and stuff.
Yeah, you don't get that at all now. I mean, when they started saying, "Well, bring your candy into the hospital so it can be X-rayed," it kind of freaked parents out. So they're like, no, type 2 diabetes, or you get kidnapped by a pedophile. I think you'll just stay home tonight. So
let's do the nostalgia thing. Let's talk about candy. I think we started touching on it. And Terry Lynn said that she wasn't fond of Tootsie Rolls.
They were awesome.
Yeah, I think Tootsie Rolls for me were last. Like I had priorities, right? It's like, of course, chocolate, like any of the candy bars and things like that. That's always your big scores. And then I think from there, we start getting some individual taste. But I was never too much into the hard stuff like back then, like the caramels, the real tough chews, and like the little, what was it, those peanut butter? They were like in the black wrappers and the orange wrappers.
Right, with the taffy, that
yeah,
taffy stuff.
It was like a peanut butter taffy or something, but it was always so sticky, or tough and sticky.
Yeah,
I was never too much into the hard chews. So, but the Tootsie Rolls were like, that was kind of like I'd save them kind of mostly for last. And when I was desperate, and I'm like, I wanted some candy. Those were like what I would have, before the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, Snickers was always like the crown jewel inside your candy thing. Size bars, or Charleston Chew, something like that. The ones that were the absolute worst were like the taffy or those wax things with juice in them.
Oh yeah.
they'd be like little bottles of Coke or something inside wax, or vampire teeth wax. Those are nasty. But
you'd always try to you try to bite the top off the little wax thing. You drink it, then you had to try to do the wax.
Yeah,
thing, and you're like, no,
it was gross. The pixie sticks were also very good, which was type 2 diabetes in a stick. But
candy. Now this isn't probably very political, but candy cigarettes was awesome to get. Because that was like a score too. Because candy cigarettes, there was something about them as a candy. It was so good. And yes, we'd pretend to smoke sometimes. As a kid, I mean, that was the thing back then.
Some of them were either the real candy, where it was sugar through and through, and then they had the bubblegum ones that, after you got done blowing off the powdered sugar to make it look like it was smoke, you could chew the whole cigarette like, bubblegum, bazooka bubblegum.
Oh yeah. I like the candy ones though. I like those were like, for some reason, those were so good. I don't know. That, and I'm a Smarties fan. I do like Smarties. Some people don't like Smarties. I like Smarties. And interesting fact about Smarties, that they are made from the same molds that they used to use to make the ammo. And the World War II presses, like they press the ammo pellets, and I guess they refurbished them into making Smarties. So it was kind of just learned that recently. I thought it was pretty cool because my wife bought me a big old huge tube of Smarties, like one of those where it's way too much. I'll probably never eat it, for a couple of years. But yeah, I like Smarties.
They last forever, so you got till the end of time.
Right. Yeah, I definitely did not like when I didn't like the popcorn balls. Anything homemade like that sometimes because you couldn't trust it, or I don't know. But because we would have one day you would make like some cookies or something, and like wrap them up or have them like in a little bag or something,
But now it's just the opposite. I mean, all the stuff that comes packaged comes from China, and it's got mercury paint on it. And, the homemade stuff is what you really want. Everything is going upside down. And
so I see you see me says you didn't like $1 million bars then. Yum.
They still have those. That was like all coconut, wasn't it?
I know like Chico sticks are like a coconut based kind of. I like the Chico sticks or Chico sticks, however you want to pronounce it. Before I wasn't nice, a teen came to trick or treat. I enjoyed giving them a scoop of ice cream in their bags. Oh. Nice. There you go, Bob. He would. He's that guy. The wax bottles were weird. That's what Taylor said. Yeah. Love the candy cigs, though. Yep. I know. I mean, there was something about those candy cigarettes, man. I'm telling you. I don't know what it was. I think it was because, too, it was the thing. It was because back then, when we all grew up, and Stacey, this, back then, people smoked everywhere. Restaurants, there's people now that didn't realize you could smoke in restaurants. In fact, it was sometimes hard to even get a non-smoking seat.
Yeah.
And you could smoke in hospitals. I mean, it was just common everywhere you went, So of course, as kids, we imitated. Of course, I became a smoker for 20 years. Myself, I smoked for 20 years.
Well, I blame seatbelts because when seatbelts came along, everybody just kept upping their game on being neurotic about other things. It's cigarettes. You can't put your kid in the back of the pickup truck anymore. You got to have, a child seat all the way up until they're graduating college. It's really gotten to where the neuroticism in society has reached a highest level.
Now, I tell you what, I think one thing, and I'm afraid to bring this up. I feel like I'm going to go to hell, but I was always disappointed when I would get Christian literature. And again, I'm not knocking the Christians. Like I said, I'm a Christian myself. But as a kid, you would get that brochure, and then and it would always be like some piece of little candy, like a little strawberry thing or something, and then they would give you the pamphlet, and it would be like a little prayer or something, or like a psalm or something. And I get it. It was nice, and I know I'll probably go to hell for even saying it, but when you're a kid, it's like you want the good stuff, and you weren't worried about salvation back then. You just at that, like when I was a kid, it was like I feared God, and and we had went to church or whatever. Like not my no, not the family I grew up with the church, but I had gone to church with some friends and stuff. So like I just feared God, and I was just brought up that way. But I didn't really want to think about it all the time. Like when you're a kid, you're like, you don't care about salvation and stuff.
Yeah, Halloween's your day. It's like, the only other day that's your day is your own birthday. But, for kids, it is, it's all for kids. That's what it's for. It's dressing up, getting, whacked out on as much sugar as you can get, and, dressing up in your favorite superhero. That's what it's all about.
Right. So we got a few different comments. I try not to miss everybody's here, but let's see. I see you seem said, yeah, I remember those Kool-Aid straws too. Bob did say he got a lot of windows soaked back then. Well, yeah, if you're giving the kids ice cream in their bags, jerk. Jeez. But yeah, and ICU says I rode in the back of pick 'em up truck, drank from a garden hose, made mud pies, and I'm still here. And Terry Lynn said, "Yeah, you didn't." Oh yeah, and then she was talking about with the literature. Yeah, you didn't want to throw it away because it's like you almost felt like you were going to go to hell if you threw it away. And it says, "Yeah, you just knew you were going to hell if you did." So,
well,
but yeah, I mean, and you could even that's just kind of a blend of nostalgia is, the fact of like, well, we all grew up in the 70s and the 80s and stuff. Yeah, we didn't have to worry too much about the seatbelts. I remember laying in the back window of the vehicle at times, and I can remember my grandma braking on hitting the brakes, and I rolled into the back seat, off the top of the thing, and it was fun, I remember those things. Hell, I even remember like some of those, and it used to almost scare me. But my grandma was notorious, and I love her for this. Is there were some severely steep hills in some of the places we would visit, up in Michigan where I grew up, and whenever she would I swear to God, it felt like she would get up to like 100 miles an hour, even though I know as a kid it wasn't. But she would gun it and go. And I swear, I thought we were just gonna I thought we were gonna die. Like I thought we were going off a cliff but she would go over these things. My heart would just drop, my stomach, and we would. She used to do that stuff all the time. And but again, it's like if you think about it nowadays, people be like, "Well, that's reckless," and she could have lost control or whatever, this and that. But I mean, there were so many things that we got to do as kids that I'm grateful for. But yet, for some reason, I can't find myself. I can't let my kids do that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my grandfather out on the farm where I grew up, out in the country, you got the dirt roads, and then you have the ditches on either side of the road. And in the wintertime, he, took an old fashioned refrigerator door, which has the bow like a ship on it. It's those old. They'd have to take off the doors back in the day because kids would crawl in the refrigerator, lock themselves in, and suffocate. So when they got rid of a refrigerator, they would always take off the door so that wouldn't happen. Well, he would take the door, hook it up to a chain, and drag us in the snow behind the 4-wheel drive truck from one ditch to the next ditch, whiplashing us around, in the cornfields, and if that happened today, that there would be like a media, frenzy about it. people coming down with from child services and all this other. Like, no, we all just got on the back of that door and bobsledded behind the pickup truck. It was, very redneck bobsledding, but you can't do that anymore. You can't do that today.
Oh, I know. And that's what's crazy is, like I said, for Halloween, I remember it would be like me and some buddies, and we were like 10 and 11, 12, whatever, and we were running around the country in the dark. No adults. My grandparents, who I grew up with, they would be back at the house giving out candy, for anybody that showed up to our house. But we're out running and as fast as we can, house to house, trying to get to as much as we could, And of course, being in Michigan at the end of October, you start sucking in that cold air by the end of the night, like the next day, it's like either you're running a fever or, something, but it was worth it. It was always worth it.
You got candy for a month and it's all under your pillow. So, it's the best day all the way up until Christmas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so much of it would go to waste though, because suckers, right? Suckers. So like there was really like the two main suckers was Dum Dums and Tootsie Rolls, right? The Tootsie Pops.
Well, they had those ones with the loop stick that you'd hold on to. The paper loop that you usually got from like the doctor's office. Those were the cheapest.
Right. That's like the third we don't like to talk about category. That's like the generic. And what sucked about those, and y'all know what I'm talking about, those is the sticks. The sticks are the quality because the candy itself wasn't that bad. It's the sticks that screwed you over because they started getting that papery, from your, and they would just start to disintegrate and
sucking on paper.
Yeah, it's that was the worst. Dum Dums were okay, but they were always a little smaller, right? But what was cool about Dum Dums is like you had a variety of flavors, so you didn't know which one. You had your favorites. You'd hope that you got something,
What were those ones with the Tootsie Pop? Those are the ones with they tried to tell you it was gum on the inside or a Tootsie Roll on the inside, but it was
there was two. They had one was the gum. Okay. And they had one that was Tootsie Roll. So like the chocolate ones, the chocolate Tootsie Pop, it was like a chocolate flavored, and then in the inside was the Tootsie Roll. Mm-hmm. Then they had the regular Tootsie Pop, which was like a red or something, like a cherry, and in the middle there was gum.
Yeah, it never seemed to come out that way in the end. I mean, the gum was like it. You'd start to chew it and it would like break apart and dissolve in your mouth too. And it's like, that's not what gum's supposed to do.
So Terry Lynn actually brought up a good point. Yeah, Charms Blow Pops, she said was everything.
Yeah, that's what it were. Okay.
Yeah, so Charms, definitely Charms Blow Pops. That was a good one too. Anytime you scored things like that, of course, I like the Tootsie Roll ones. So I wasn't always worried too much about getting the other ones with the gum in the middle. I wanted the one with the Tootsie Roll ones because I wasn't a big gum chewer. I had done that phase. Like, in fact, Terry Lynn and I was talking about this the other day. It was like, there was a couple types of gum. As a kid, you didn't judge gum by, like, I don't know. Like, we all did like Hubba Bubba was like the big thing. If you could score Hubba Bubba, whatever, the Bubblicious, whatever, that's this gum that not only the flavors lasted a little longer than the adult gum, but you could also blow the bubbles, the best. As a kid, the only way I could do like juicy fruit, don't get me wrong, adult gum tasted good, but like you couldn't just do like one stick when you're a kid. If you did like one stick of juicy fruit, the flavor was gone in like 2 minutes. You couldn't blow bubbles. So as a kid, it's like that sucked. You'd have to like pop 3 of them and then chew it for a little bit, then spit it out. So
I do that to this day. Whenever I'm trying to get past having a cigarette, I throw some gum in my mouth and I'm like, that's not enough. I need some more. And then of course you need some more. So I've got like 5 sticks of gum in my mouth. I'm like, this needs to be spit out now.
I know that's the thing, but It says the door you dreaded knocking on was when you didn't know the resident was a Pentecostal. Yeah, there was usually, like, I think in our neighborhood, again, because we were out in the country, we kind of knew, like, we all kind of knew the places that, they usually have their lights off. It was kind of universal. But we kind of knew the places that's like, even if their lights seemed like they could be on, we kind of avoided, like, we kind of knew the certain places. Was that kind of how it was for you too, Stacey? You just kind of knew, like, the place to go.
There were kids who didn't participate. There was a reason why they didn't participate. It's because their parents, and it's not because they didn't want to. They wanted to do all the same stuff, but mom and dad were very strict about the whole idea. And yeah, me and my buddies would usually visit those houses in the middle of the night, past when everybody else was done. And one house we bought 6 cases of plastic forks and knives and spoons, and we stuck them in the yard, where it looked like they were sprouting plasticware in their yard. They'd come out and be like, "What the hell just happened?" But
so we had some pretty notorious TP jobs that were done every year. Did you ever partake in any?
Just once, when I was a freshman in high school, I was dragged along with the seniors and TP'd a bunch of houses. But it was people that we knew that we actually liked. Teachers that we liked, we TP'd their house, not teachers that we hated. I don't know why that made it okay, but that's just the way that it went down. It was people that we, basically wanted to give a hard time to, that we liked. So it was.
I think the best one, and I will admit to this day, I never really I didn't really partake in any TPs. I did try one time to throw a roll of toilet paper over a tree, which I had a really good arm as a baseball player back then. But like the toilet paper got stuck up in the tree and it didn't unfurl or anything. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. But anyways, one of the best jobs, I will admit, is our high school was shaped in a square, and it had like a little courtyard in the middle of like some trees that nobody ever really used. There was, I don't think it was used for anything. They might have had a few picnic benches in there, but I don't think anybody ever had access to the middle. And somehow somebody TP'd all the trees in the middle of the courtyard. They were able to do it. And we always thought that was so amazing because we didn't know how they did it. I mean, back then as kids, we're all like, oh my God, man, somebody must have had access or, got up on the school roof or whatever, blah, 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 like all this stuff. And
yeah, we had the same out design in our high school too. And, the thing of it is nobody really had, there was only a few classrooms that could actually see the courtyard. So it was like not worth to do anything, TP the courtyard or anything like that, because nobody would actually see it. It was like home ec and shop. Those were the only ones that could actually see the courtyard. The rest of the school couldn't, so it wasn't really worth it.
Well, so since we talked about candy, what was do you have a favorite costume or favorite costumes that you can remember?
My grandmother was very big on making costumes from scratch. I didn't ever have a costume really that was bought from a store. And my grandmother was very creative. I mean, one year, and it's carried over from those floats that I was telling you about. We would always have our own costumes on these floats. One year, everybody was a barnyard animal. One year, we were Care Bears. One year, we were, witches and scarecrows and different things like that.
Nice.
And I ended up wearing the costume before the parade and the float at the school. So I got to be a cow one year with that giant head, and she literally fashioned it after that milk mascot. I can't remember what it was called now, but it was basically, my costume looked like the mascot cartoon character. Same way with, the Care Bears. It was, big head. We walked around Sesame Street, Bert and Ernie and all of that. It was all handmade. And, my grandmother was an artist in that regard.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, I know like at least one year I definitely did the hobo thing. I think that was always a go-to when you needed a costume. You just dirty up your face with some black stuff, and just called it a hobo. Got the flannel shirt or something. That was always the popular thing. I think probably my favorite. I barely can even remember is I did get a Boba Fett mask back then, like the old
Nice.
with the the little band that kind of hold it to your face. It had the one little breathe hole, and I think it even had like a little chest armor type thing it came with. I can't even hardly remember, but that was one of my favorites. I was like, oh man, Boba Fett, and but I remember that I had to take it off. I had to take it off because you couldn't breathe in the thing, man.
Well, that'd be worse on the day. I mean, with Mandalorian coming back out, and everybody wants to. If you have like original stuff, that's a mint all by itself.
Yeah. So let's see. Let me go back to some comments here. I'm trying to keep up with some, but yeah. Terry Lynn said that her dad always had Tootsie Rolls because of the Knights of Columbus, so she got. So that's why she got sick of them. So big old poop size Tootsie Rolls. And then, but yeah, ICU says we lived in a neighborhood with a lot of Jehovah's. I guess JH is that the Jehovah Witnesses? Probably they hated our Halloween and Christmas decorations. I once chewed up a bunch. Bob says, "Well, I once chewed up a bunch of Tootsie Rolls, reshaped them into a turd, and stuck it next to our sleeping dog. Mom freaked out, beat the dog first, and then me when she found out what I did." I see it's Bob.
Interesting.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, Bob.
Tootsie Rolls were introduced in World War II in MREs, and they served a dual purpose. In the MRE itself, they told you that you could eat it because it was edible, but it was also a fire starter for a campfire. So if you had like just nothing but like wet stuff around you, you could set fire to the Tootsie Roll, and it would essentially heat up the whatever's you've got going on, the wood or brush, to where you could actually have a real fire. It was a survival candy.
See, there you go. You're eating like those starter logs that you buy for your fireplace.
Yeah.
So there. See, hopefully you guys learned a lot in tonight's show. I think we covered a lot of Halloween. I think we covered most of the iconic imagery. I mean, we could get into things like full moons. I think that's pretty self-explanatory because I think ultimately a full moon, it stands for a lot of things, but you're not just going to have, it's full moons, werewolves, you got vampires, werewolves, the Frankenstein's monster, all of your iconic mummies, those all part of your Hollywood. When things became mainstream and stuff, of course, they're going to get tacked into Halloween there. Any as we start wrapping up toward the back of the show, what do you have any thoughts that you wanted to add about Halloween?
Well, on the lunar thing, science has been trying to discredit the aspect of the lunar cycle creating lunacy. It is being a wives' tale or superstition, things of that sort. The problem being is that they're finding out scientifically that it actually does affect people, especially people who are sensitive, because the same way that the tides are pulled, with gravity because of the moon being at the apex, that the brain, the fluid, and the water in you, which consists of 72% of your body is water, is also thrown off balance because of those phases of the moon, and it all has to do with basically the tides. All it takes is a little bit of a hormone shift, and people's whole perspective of life changes, and they get a little bit weird, and Science is coming around to the idea that it's not necessarily a wives' tale, that it actually happens. More women give birth on a full moon than any other time, whether it be early or late. Women go into labor during a full moon. It's just the highest. It's the peak, and every maternity ward will tell you that. They just know when a full moon's coming, and they're like, "All right, let's get ready for it."
Yeah, and uh, I wanted to also talk a little bit about the overall feeling of Hollywood, Halloween. So, but I think too, if you really go back, I mean, think about just the overall feeling that people was getting back then. I mean, think about just in life in general. I mean, you had this spring and summer and even beginning of fall where things were still very much alive and colorful. And then here we go. Now we're getting into that time when everything starts to essentially die. The trees, leaves fall off, the grass sometimes in some areas will go brown, things like that. Um, you know, so everything just has that cold, almost heartless, death feel, and it just really adds to all of everything we've talked about from all the cultures when they get to that time of year. So I want to bring up another point too. Is I think that there is, and I'm sure you can elaborate on this too. Is it feels as if there's certain, and we talk about them like in Back to the Future and things like that, but certain points in time that seem to things sort of come together at various points in time for whatever reason. And of course, these different cultures all gravitated toward that end of, October, beginning of November. Of course, like we said, this is that transition from, a lot of things living to that death. But just like for some reason, I keep coming across all these things that seem to go back to like 1968 or something like that. It's just certain years, certain things that just seem to be prevalent. Do you think there's something like that that goes on with the veil and everything right at that time?
And it's not just from pop culture. I mean, this is what I was trying to get to before with the Sabians. This is the trauma that has taken place throughout history in this particular season, when the Pleiades is coming over the horizon, and the end of October, beginning of November. Tragedy always seems to take place in this frame. Now, the Great Depression, every financial collapse that has taken place in this country has always happened at the end of October, beginning of November. Black Monday, Black Tuesday, Black Friday, all of them happened in October. The collapse of Lehman Brothers happened in August, but nobody really paid attention until October, because that's what set off Bear Stearns and the rest of the whole 2008 thing. This time period always seems to have a negative effect. Now, right now, we seem to be not having that so much. People aren't paying attention to it, largely because of Mercury being retrograde. We've talked about this before, where things happen in the opposite, the negative of what would normally happen during Mercury retrograde, which ends on the 25th. It goes straight on the 25th, which means, based off of astrology of what we know, all hell is going to break loose right around the 25th of world events, and it's basically going to be pretty scary all over again, just in time for Halloween. So people are going to probably dress up like Dr. Fauci to knock on your door and scare the daylights out of you.
Right, ruin things.
The mandate. You get the mandate. This isn't the Fauci.
That invitation was made me cough. Oh, yes. But no, I think that I love in general. I love the whole fun aspect of it. I know that there's a lot of people that are out there. This is the time when you've got preachers out there that are trying to help people that are getting into. I know like Sean Carter, our friend, from the Paranormal Council, right now, he's trying to make sure people aren't getting caught up in rituals and things, and that's a good thing. I have nothing against that. I personally like to have fun with Halloween. I'm personally not gonna go out and perform any major rituals, but I do like to enjoy and partake in having some fun with Halloween, some scary movies and whatnot. Maybe not some scary movies.
On that front, I've seen an uptick of people who are, convinced, virtue or not, that they're actually not only being possessed, but they're being haunted. The uptick in spirit activity has really gotten people who are just on the sensitive side of things, wanting to figure. They're calling me and trying to figure out ways of cleansing the home and warding off their house and protecting themselves, because they're just freaking out that people are coming into their room at night. Spirits are coming into their room at night. The veil is thin, and it just seems to be a real huge spike in activity on students. People who I've had as students for years are suddenly losing their minds of all the stuff that's going on in their lives, and it's all based around this time of year.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, and I think that there is something to be said out there, period, for people this time of year too, because the veil is thinning and all this stuff is happening out there. That, yeah, I mean, if you feel like you're in trouble, you should try to reach out to people as well. I mean, I know we talk about the fun and the fun aspect of Halloween, which I do. I think people can enjoy it. I think they can have fun. I think in just these type of traditions of trick-or-treating and maybe decorating, just having fun, watching movies, spending family time. I think that's usually the intent. So yeah, Terry Lynn said, love scary movies, have no one to watch them with me because I hate them. That's what she said. Josh hates them. I still end up watching it with her.
Have you seen Free Guy yet with Ryan Reynolds?
No.
That you would love that movie. It's because Ryan Reynolds is an NPC inside of a video game that becomes self-aware, which means hilarity ensues.
Right.
You have to see that movie. It is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, that's what Terry Lynn, or that's what I think our son even was wanting to see that movie, because anything with video games, he's gonna want to see it.
Yeah, they have a lot of, some of the. I'm not a video game person, but I recognized a lot of video game aspects of it because I, have seen them, of course. But they really get in. They even have some of the YouTube video game people that just, you watch them play video games on YouTube. They have a lot of, cameos of these people. So I think you'd enjoy it a lot.
So ICU says, imagine driving down the road and you hear a sound and your driver's side window shatters all over you. It happened today. Didn't find rocks or bullets inside. Maybe Ghosty did it. I don't know.
Hard to say. Could have been a bird. Those things are, coming at you pretty hard too.
Yeah, and even if a rock hit the window, it doesn't mean that the rock was necessarily going to pierce the window. It could have skipped off of it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I would say that before I would go that route before I definitely would ghost. Even though yes, I'm a paranormal guy, but I tend to debunk a lot of those things more. I tend to go to natural explanations first before I actually get to the whole ghost thing. See, a lot of people think that just because I'm into paranormal, like that everything is ghost related. Like everything I do is like, oh, that's got to be a ghost. Oh, that's got to be a ghost. But actually, it's the very opposite. There's a lot of things I'm like, no, it's not. This is not paranormal. It's paranormal doesn't happen as often as sometimes people think. It really does. I mean, sometimes in our house, because we have that revolving door of, a train station, so to speak, of ghosts that pop in. Sometimes we got to stop, deal with it, send them on, and but really, other than that, most things that have happened are just naturally occurring things, bumps in the night.
And you got to think of it that way too, because if you don't, you end up going down the spiral, this death spiral of sanity, because you think everything that happens is a sign. A cat takes a dump on your lawn, and that means something. It is not really that way.
That's a new form of divination there.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised if there are books that I have that talk about all these different signs of what you can expect. Mostly has to do with money. You get, a bird shits on your shoulder, and that's good luck, meaning money is coming your way. Different things like that. And it's like, no, just you got
scat divination.
Yeah.
So let's see. Taylor said, yeah, Jacksepticeye is supposed to be in it. So that's why Christian wants to see it. Jacksepticeye is a YouTuber, does a lot of game videos and stuff. So supposedly he's supposed to be in the Ryan Reynolds movie there.
Mm-hmm.
Bob says, seeing a ritual of a bunch of 70-year-old witches dance around a fire naked might not scare me, but it might make me go blind. So, yeah, and then I see says a bird can do that. Oh, my God. Well, and again, it may not be a bird, but again, it most likely could have been a rock that, shattered your window and just skipped off, and, you didn't actually find the rock inside your vehicle. So was you moving, I guess? Oh, yeah, driving down the road. So she said driving down the road. So I would say it was probably a rock that, flipped up somewhere and skipped off your window and shattered your window. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Or even a nut, a metal nut falling off a truck that's in front of you. Because of the angles on it, it'll bounce after it shatters because it's just in centrifugal force. As it's spinning, it hits and then bounces off. And, here in Louisiana, we don't actually have gravel. We have micro shells that have been dredged up from the Gulf. Those things are essentially petrified shells that are vibrate at the same frequency as glass. So they hit a windshield, just barely hit a windshield, and it'll just spider web the whole windshield just because it's acrylic.
Well, she said she was driving at 55, and she said there was no one on the road with her. So I would say then most likely maybe like what Stacey was talking about, even a bird, and look, it's possible. And this is just, I'm going to throw this out there not to scare you, but there is that stray bullet possibility. Doesn't mean the bullet has to go in your car. Okay. It could have easily ricocheted off your windshield. Not trying to scare you, but so if you didn't have any vehicles nearby, then, clearly something hit that vehicle or hit that windshield, causing that driver's side to shatter. And again, it doesn't take a whole lot. So it really doesn't.
A low velocity 22 can do it. And it's hunting season. So,
yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, it's hunting season. So there's always that possibility. And it's a good thing that you're not hurt, because obviously you would have said you were injured, and I'm glad you're not. So I know the whole time we're like trying to debunk it. We're like, so you're okay, right? We didn't bring that up, but yes. Past. Oh, and she says past the pickup truck, but no one on that side of the road. Well, if you passed a pickup truck, ICU, then that means, yes, something could have came off that truck. But anyways, all right. So window completely shattered, not the windshield, but driver's side window. Right. No, just glass everywhere. Yeah. And like I said, whatever hit your window could have just bounced off. No matter what it was, whether it was a nut, bullet, rock, chunk of a meteor, kid, whatever hit your windshield, it probably just bounced off and shattered your window, and there's no evidence for you. But I wouldn't think a ghost. That's for sure. That's one thing I would probably be the last of anything I would say a ghost. Again, not that I'm saying ghosts can't do that, but I don't think I've ever heard of that.
ghosts along the side of the road are the worst, because you're just driving along and all of a sudden there's a person standing right there on the edge of the road in the middle of nowhere. You're like, what the hell was that? And then you pass them again, and it's like, okay, thank you, no more. I get the idea.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I will say I don't think I've had too much of that as far as when I was driving. I don't think I've seen. I think there was a couple times where I'm like, that was odd, and then I didn't always go back to double check, but yeah. So I mean, but I know what you're talking about because it's happened to me like once with where it's like the same person
Yeah.
kind of
The only
thing.
times when it happens, to me, I'll see the same one twice as I'm going down the road. I'll see it and I'm like, was that a person? And then I'll look in the mirror and you can't really see him in the mirror. And then I'll keep driving and like another mile down the road, then there's the second one. And then at that point, you're like thinking somebody's stranded or something. You pull over and there's nobody there except one of those little side road crosses, like where somebody died. And it's, I'm like, okay, I get it. Thank you. No need to, keep this up all night. So I don't know. Just my first thought isn't ghost. My first thought is somebody's in trouble alongside of the road. And that's essentially what turns out to be a ghost because for whatever reason, they're still there.
Well, Bob said not to worry. You never hear the bullet that gets you.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unless you're close enough, maybe you could hear it first, but I doubt it. It's going to outrun the sound no matter what. So, I mean, unless it gets you in the heart, you get that 13 seconds of life or whatever it is. 13 or 14 seconds?
Yeah, or just shoot you in the liver. You're just in agony, going, "Ow, why?" You hear everything, and it's getting really macabre. But it's not always true. If you get hit straight in the head, you never hear it.
Yeah. So what do you think, Stacey? Did we miss anything on any kind of iconic Halloween stuff? I think we did a pretty good job. I think we covered most of the big icon. We did the history of Halloween tonight, which I'm really happy.
The only thing that we didn't cover were witches that actually like the Wiccans of the modern era and their whole belief structure on how Halloween is their Christmas,
Right.
but
yeah, well, we probably could do a whole show on Wiccan type stuff and get into some of that. Like that could be an idea. I think we did talk a little bit about some of that before. I think when you were on, I always enjoy hearing and learning new things on that type of stuff. So, but yeah, it's the season. The thin veil. I think. So we did cover. I think the veil thinning again. I would love to put together some. I can't even talk about it, but one of these days, if I can ever get my invention going, I would be able, with my invention, I would be able to have tons of data and prove things like the veil and does the veil thin? Does the veil thin more than one time a year? What does that look like? Is it kind of a wave, or is it a couple peaks in the year? I mean, what does it look like, for the overall? I think that would be, and that's something that no one can really answer, but I think it would be nice to find. I think it'd be nice to find out that answers, and if I can ever get my invention going, we'd be able to have the data to some breakthrough data.
Yeah, well, I mean, historically or from an ancient point of view, then yeah, it does on a yearly scale. but there's also mini cycles, and they intertwine with each other, and the intensity of these cycles of where the thinning of the veil happens all coincide. And the Mayans, created a whole calendar around that sort of thing. And it's astrology based, based off of, like what I was saying before, with Mercury being retrograde, pulls you in one direction until the stars realign in another direction and the veil, snaps back. It's all of these things are a living, breathing thing that can't be necessarily timed on a calendar, like in October. They all feed off of each other, and once we get the equipment, like what your thing is going to show, that it looks like there's no rhythm to it, but there is, and it all has its own cycle. You have big cycles and microcycles, just like the sun has its own cycles too. It has an 11-year cycle, also has a 400-year cycle. And when those two cycles coincide, that's when you start seeing some really intense activity. So,
right. Yeah, Terry Lynn said, don't end the show. Having fun-ish. And Bob said, dated a Wiccan when I was young. He said, I tried to date a nun, but couldn't get into the ha. So, Bob, you're so dirty. You're so dirty. But that's why I love Bob. He's definitely unique, and makes us laugh. That's for sure. But yeah, other than that, I mean, that's all I really got. I think we did good. I'm happy. I'm glad you came on to help me co-host this, so you can add a lot more info, and I think you did that as well. And it was good to talk about some different things, bounce some things back and forth.
Yeah, I got to wear my Hawaiian shirt. I was in not the Cayman Islands, but the Keys in Florida last week, and I had many of frozen fruit drinks, mango and banana, and hanging out in the Navy base down there, and stopped in Key West and bought a bunch of really ugly shirts. So I came back with a little bit of a something, but sniffle, sore throat kind of thing.
Darren said, and bikinis.
Yeah. Oh, I saw some. I didn't see any women bikinis necessarily. I expected to see a lot of on the beach, but it turns out there's a lot of really old men that like to wear banana hammocks. It's like, dude, right there next to the restaurant on the beach. Why do that to me? I'm trying to have my mahi. I get to see your hairy thing. But
some people just don't care sometimes. They don't care, and I don't think they get it. Like, that's what sucks. I was on the phone. I'm at work. I'm at, like, we have these cabinets every so often that's got a bunch of fiber optic, connections and stuff in them. So I'm at this cabinet on the side of the road, and I'm on the phone. This old man clearly sees me. I'm holding the phone up, like I have it on speakerphone. So I'm holding it up to my face, and he's like looking at me, and he just gets on his riding mower, and he commences to start mowing his lawn as the sun's going down. And then not only that, he's like makes multiple passes right by the road. It's like, dude, for real. It's like you can see him on the freaking phone here, and it's like, and then a couple of passes he did was like on the road. I'm like, the road is mowed, man. It ain't gonna get any shorter. It's fine. I don't know what you're mowing. I'm like, I was just freaking out, man. And like the dude on the phone, like for my work, he's just laughing because I'm like saying this stuff out loud. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? I'm just going off on this whole tirade because this guy's like, people don't care. They see you doing things, and it's like you have to know, like when you're old or when you're just like, I wear shirts. I wear clothes appropriate for my fat ass. I'm not gonna go and I see these fat people on the beach. They're just wearing their thong, and I'm like, you know what you look like. You know that's gross. That's gross. Nobody the only person that could probably get away with wearing those type of things is like your Calvin Klein models or something. That's it. That's the only exception to wearing that kind of underwear. Other than that, if you're like just a regular dad, like I don't care if you think you have a decent body still, most likely you don't. Don't wear it. Wear something appropriate. Wear some swimming trunks, a shirt, tank top, whatever.
I thought it
I
was
don't wear
hilarious.
tank tops.
My brother, I was down there with my brother, and he thought it was hilarious. He started whipping out the camera and posting it on Facebook, and laughing and pointing at the guy out on the beach. And the guy actually, he didn't care. He bent over and essentially showed everybody his junk. And
That's stupid.
My brother just kept flashing pictures, because he thought it was the craziest thing in the world.
That's so, like I said, you have to be self-aware. You have to know there should be laws against this stuff. I mean, that's why I don't even like to look at myself in the mirror. I don't even do it. I just maybe like for shaving, face up. But Robert said, oh God, what is Bob going to say? So the last time I went to the beach, same environmentalists started splashing water on me and then tried to push me back in the ocean.
Beached whale, that's what that is.
Yeah. Bob with his dad jokes. Oh, that's funny though. But yeah, that's what I'm saying, folks. Know your limitations. All right. You know what you look like. You're not a supermodel, most likely. Maybe you are. I don't know. Maybe you're watching this and you're a supermodel. If you are, fine. Wear what you want. But most of normal people, we don't have the tight bodies anymore that we used to have back in the day. So wear appropriate clothes, please. Cover that shit up. Yeah, I know. Like some of these women, God, like Terry Lynn, and she likes to point them out to me because she's just like, she wants to make sure I suffer with her because she'll see these women that are wearing some of the most inappropriate clothing and they're chunky and they just got stuff hanging out. And it's like, why? Why are you wearing that? Why? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, maybe they don't own mirrors.
Well, I mean, you want to find them, you got to just go to Walmart. They actually have a website for that. The fashion of Walmart, something where people just post pictures of the grossest outfits that people just go shopping in. Whatever.
Yeah, I used to love that. We used to love going to that website where it was like Walmart, people of Walmart or whatever. It was like nothing but just you just seen the dredges of society of Walmart. It's crazy. But yeah, ICU says, oh, women do stuff too. Come out in a low tank with or without proper underclothing, exposing everything. And she said, and older women don't have a nice set. So, and that's what I'm saying. It's like, folks, know your limitations. That's all. I think we covered that little comedy bit. But all right, well, I think we should. I think we're gonna wrap it up, man. It's been a good long show, almost 2 hours.
Cool.
We're like pushing almost an hour 50. So I think this was a really good show. I hope you guys learned a lot. And so join me next week. I don't even know what we'll be doing, but we'll figure it out together. I'm sure we'll be doing, and I may go live here this weekend. Just depends how I feel. I've been having this sinus drainage triggering these coughs. So, in fact, I'm about to have one right now. But yeah, so folks, join me next week. Other than that, any parting words, Stacey?
No, just be safe out there. Things are getting weird for everyone. So
hang in there. Hang in there, and remember, always seek the truth. We'll see you next week.